in the kilograms, sitting inside a mountain right now, and it might be the most dangerous number on the planet. Before I go further, if you are someone who actually wants to know what happens next, not just what happened today, and then hit subscribe right now. Because Professor Jiang, Predictive Intelligence, is not just a news channel. We do not just tell you the headline, we tell you where it leads. We connect the dots before the rest of the world does. So if you want to be ahead of the story, instead of reacting to it, subscribe now. Okay, let's get into it. Iran has stockpiled more than 800 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Inside that stockpile, there is a smaller amount enriched to 90%. That is generally considered weapons grade. At the same time, the IAEA, the world's nuclear watchdog, has admitted something huge. It can no longer reliably track what Iran is doing inside its most sensitive sites. And put those two facts together, and you get a window that some assessments suggest is now measured in weeks, not months, not years, weeks. Now, I want to be careful here. This is the kind of story that gets either wildly exaggerated or completely ignored. So let's do neither. Let's actually walk through how we got here. Because once you see the full picture, the history, the personalities, the economics, you will understand why this moment feels different. Here's where it gets interesting. This is not really one crisis. It is about 6 different crises, all building quietly for years. And in 2025, they are arriving at the same intersection. At the same time, the stockpile is the largest it has ever been. The centrifuges are the most advanced Iran has ever installed. The inspection system is the weakest it has been in decades. The diplomatic channel between Washington and Tehran is basically stalled. The region is more tense than it has been in a generation. And 2 leaders, Donald Trump in Washington and Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, are both operating on compressed political timelines. None of this is new on its own, but all of it winding up at the same time. That is the convergence that makes this moment different. Understand this. That is the part most coverage skips. So let's go back to where it actually starts. Because the origin story matters. Iran's nuclear program did not begin as a secret weapons project. It started in the 1950s as a civilian energy program. And here's the twist. It was actually supported by the United States under the Eisenhower administration's Atoms for Peace program. Back when Iran was ruled by the Shah, in 1968, Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, agreeing to stay away from weapons development in exchange for civilian nuclear technology. For a long time, that is exactly what it was, a civilian program with civilian goals. So what changed everything? Many analysts point to one thing: the 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s. During that war, Saddam Hussein's forces used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians. This is well documented. And here is the part that shapes how Tehran sees the world even today. The international response: almost nothing. Some Western governments, including the United States, were quietly supporting Iraq during parts of that war. So Iran watched its people die from chemical weapons, while the major powers looked away. Think about it from Tehran's side for a second. What lesson would you take from that? The lesson Iran's leadership seems to have taken was simple. Conventional military strength is not enough. Not if the major powers decide your survival does not matter. If you want real deterrence, you need something that cannot just be ignored. That is not really ideology. That is strategy. Forced in a war the world chose to ignore. Fast forward to 2002, an Iranian opposition group reveals 2 hidden nuclear sites: an enrichment facility at Natanz and a heavy water facility at Arak, both built without telling the IAEA. This kicks off the first real international standoff. European diplomats get involved. Iran agrees to temporary suspensions, and then nothing permanent happens. Here is a pattern worth remembering. because it repeats for the next 20 years. Iran suspends something. Talks proceed for a while. The offer does not go far enough. Iran resumes. Talks collapse. The cycle starts again. Concede something small. Protect what matters. Run the clock. That one sentence basically describes Iranian nuclear diplomacy for 2 decades. By around 2012, Iran had enough advanced centrifuges and material that American intelligence reportedly estimated a sprint to 1 weapon's worth of material could take roughly 6 to 12 months. That assessment drove the push for a deal, which led to the 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA. Whatever you think of it politically, here is what it actually did. It capped Iran's enriched stockpile at around 300 kilograms, limited enrichment to under 4%, redesigned the Iraq reactor so it could not produce weapons usable plutonium, and put in place the most intensive inspection regime ever applied to a nuclear program. In return, the US, EU, and UN lifted most sanctions. Oil exports recovered. Iran got access to previously frozen assets, somewhere between $50 and $100 billion. But here's the catch. This is important. The deal had a built-in expiration problem. Many of its core restrictions were not permanent. They were scheduled to phase out over roughly 8 to 15 years. Critics called this a delay, not a solution. Supporters said the delay would buy time for broader diplomatic progress. What almost nobody modeled was the scenario that actually happened. The United States simply walked away before that progress could happen. In May 2018, the Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA and launched the Maximum Pressure Campaign, a sweeping return of sanctions designed to force Iran back to the table on tougher terms. Now here is where it gets interesting. The pressure campaign did not produce the outcome it aimed for. For about 14 months, Iran kept complying anyway, hoping Europe could preserve the benefits. It could not. American secondary sanctions are powerful enough. European banks and companies pulled out anyway. The economic relief disappeared, and Iran began a deliberate, step-by-step withdrawal. May 2009. Iran exceeds the stockpile limit. July 2019. Iran exceeds the enrichment cap. November 2019. Iran restarts centrifuges at Fordow, the facility the deal required to stay dormant. January 2020. After the strike that killed General Qasem Soleimani, Iran announces it is abandoning every remaining restriction. Notice the pattern. Each step was public, on a visible timeline, almost like a message. Every American escalation gets a direct nuclear response. That is not subtle, and that is deterrence signaling. The Biden administration then spent most of 2021 and 2022 in indirect talks through the Vienna process. And by most accounts, they got close more than once, but ran into 2 unbridgeable gaps. First, Iran wanted legally binding guarantees that a future US administration could not just tear up the deal again. The Biden team could not promise that. Constitutionally, a new president can always walk away. Second, Iran wanted the Revolutionary Guard removed from the terrorism list, a massive political lift in Washington. While all this dragged on, Iran kept enriching. By 2021, Iran was producing uranium enriched to 60%. Then in early 2023, IAEA inspectors detected particles enriched to roughly 83.7% at Fordow. Iran's explanation: an unintentional fluctuation. Most independent analysts were not convinced. You do not accidentally land at 83.7%. That number tells you your equipment can reach weapons grade. And it tells the other side too. Now let's talk about why the stockpile number matters so much. Because the physics here explains the politics. Natural uranium contains less than 1% of the fissile isotope U-235. Getting from natural levels to around 20% is by far the hardest part, the most time-consuming part. It takes the bulk of the centrifuge work. But once you are at 20%, getting to 60% is significantly faster, and going from 60 to 90% faster still. In other words, Iran cleared the genuinely difficult hurdle years ago. Everything after that is, relatively speaking, a short final sprint. The commonly cited threshold for a crude device, around 25 kilograms enriched to 90% or higher, with over 800 kilograms at 60%, the math suggests enough material for multiple devices. If further enriched, this is why many analysts now frame this less as a long-term technical question, and more as a short-term political one. Now think about this. Fordow itself is the variable that changes everything. Iran began building it in secret around the year 2000. Its existence was only revealed publicly in 2009 by the US, UK, and France together. The design choice tells you a lot. The centrifuge halls are built deep inside a mountain, under tens of meters of solid rock. That is not a cost-saving choice. According to most defense analysts, that depth is meant to defeat conventional bunker-busting weapons. The general consensus among military observers, there is really only one weapon system anywhere with a realistic chance of reaching that deep. A specialized penetrator munition that only the United States has, in very limited numbers, carried by a small fleet of stealth bombers. It cannot be transferred to allies. It requires American aircraft, American crews, American authorization. In practical terms, any military option against Fordow specifically is an American option, or it is not credible at all. On top of the hardened facility, Iran has reportedly installed advanced next-generation centrifuges there, operating several times faster than older models. Combine a hardened facility, faster centrifuges, and a large existing 60% stockpile, and you get a scenario where sprint to weapons-grade material is faster and harder to physically interrupt than at any earlier point. This is important. None of that matters as much without the next piece: the collapse of international monitoring. Nuclear verification is not just paperwork. It is the early warning system. When inspectors have continuous access, cameras running, materials tracked in real time, the world generally gets days or weeks of warning. When that access disappears, so does the warning time. Starting in February 2021, Iran suspended the additional protocol, which had allowed short-notice inspections of undeclared sites. In early 2023, Iran removed IAEA monitoring cameras from several facilities. The agency's board formally censured Iran. Iran acknowledged the censure and left the cameras off anyway. Iran also revoked the credentials of some of the IAEA's most experienced inspectors. The agency's own language now describes a loss of continuity of knowledge. Translated out of diplomatic speak, that basically means this: the people whose job is to watch this program are saying they might not see a breakout coming until it has already happened. So where does that leave the Trump administration in 2025? By most accounts, it is running two tracks at once: a maximum pressure track, expanded sanctions on Iranian oil networks, a reinforced American naval presence in the Gulf, and a quieter back channel through Omani intermediaries, signaling that a comprehensive, verifiable deal could bring real sanctions relief. And Iran, for its part, appears to be doing exactly what it has done for 2 decades, negotiating and enriching. At the same time, every additional kilogram during talks increases Tehran's leverage. Every additional centrifuge at Fordow narrows what outside powers can force unilaterally. This is not confusion. Many analysts see it as a deliberate, well-practiced strategy. But here's something that often gets left out. Iran's domestic situation shapes all of this more than people realize. Inflation inside Iran has reportedly run above 40% for several years running. The currency has lost a huge share of its value. Over the past 5 years, youth unemployment is a serious structural problem. In a country where most of the population is under 30, And we have already seen what happens when that pressure boils over. The 2019 fuel price protests, the 2022 demonstrations after Mahsa Amini's death, both spread to cities across the country and rattled the leadership. So Tehran genuinely needs sanctions relief. But it needs that relief without giving up the one asset its leadership treats as its ultimate insurance policy. That tension, real economic need versus an unwillingness to fully disarm, is, according to many observers, exactly what keeps the diplomatic track alive. Without ever letting it actually finish, now let's bring in the outside players. Because neither China nor Russia is a passive bystander here. China reportedly buys large volumes of Iranian crude at significant discounts, often cited around $10 to $15 per barrel, below market price. This reportedly funnels Tehran somewhere between $6 and $10 billion a year. In hard currency, it flows through an elaborate evasion network. Ship-to-ship transfers at sea, intermediary traders, processing through Chinese ports. Without formally acknowledging the cargo's origin, American sanctions have disrupted parts of this, but apparently not enough to seriously dent the revenue. China's interest is not ideological. Beijing does not particularly want a nuclear-armed Iran, but it also does not want American military action that damages a major oil supplier and projects American power in a region where China has been building influence. So China appears to walk a careful line, discouraging Iran from going all the way, while also blocking tougher UN sanctions, a kind of managed ambiguity that has worked for Beijing for a long time. Russia's angle looks even more transactional. Moscow has reportedly supplied Iran with advanced air defense systems that would complicate any strike planning, and Russia participates in almost every diplomatic format around this issue, just enough to be part of the conversation, but according to many Western officials, not in a way that pushes toward an actual resolution. Why would it? Higher Middle East tension tends to push oil prices up. That directly benefits Russian state revenue at a time when Moscow needs that income for its operations in Ukraine. And every bit of American attention pulled toward the Gulf is attention that does not go toward Ukraine. From a purely transactional standpoint, a long, simmering Iranian nuclear crisis may be worth more to Russia than almost anything Moscow could achieve on its own. Then there is Israel. And here the position is about as clear as international politics gets. For Israeli leadership, a nuclear-armed Iran is not a problem to be managed. It is described repeatedly as an existential threat. The October 7, 2023 attack killed roughly 1,200 people in Israel and resulted in over 200 hostages. According to Israeli and American assessments, it was planned with significant support from Iran. Hezbollah, which has fired tens of thousands of rockets into northern Israel over the past couple of years, is widely understood to be Iranian-backed and Iranian-funded. Now imagine a nuclear umbrella behind all of that. That is the scenario Israeli officials have warned about for over 15 years, repeatedly pushing for American action against Iran's program. And here's why 2025 matters specifically for that relationship. The dynamic between Trump and Netanyahu looks different now. Trump already withdrew from the JCPOA once. He already authorized the Soleimani strike. Without the extended allied consultation past administrations went through, he has not placed the same procedural brakes around military options that the Biden administration maintained for Netanyahu. That represents something rare, an alignment between American willingness to act and Israeli urgency that may simply not exist under a future administration. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Is the window of American political appetite for action actually shorter than Iran's technical timeline to a weapon? If so, that is a strange and dangerous mismatch. Now let's zoom out, because this is fundamentally an economic story too. Iran produces somewhere around 3 to 3.5 million barrels of oil per day, and roughly 21 million barrels move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is something like a fifth of global oil supply, and roughly a quarter of the world's liquefied natural gas. Iran has repeatedly signaled it could disrupt that strait in response to military action, and has enabled tools to make that disruption real. Even temporarily, mines, fast attack boats, anti-ship missiles. Some analysts, including teams at major investment banks, have floated scenarios where oil could spike toward $130 to $150 a barrel. Within 4 to 6 weeks of a major escalation at that price level, U.S. gasoline could move from today's $3 to $4 range towards $6, $7, maybe $8 a gallon. Sustained for even a few weeks, that kind of shock would hit consumer spending hard, reignite inflation that only recently came down, and land especially hard on people on fixed incomes who have already absorbed years of price increases. So where does this actually go? Let's walk through 3 ways this could play out, because laying them side by side really clarifies what is at stake. Scenario 1, a limited but real diplomatic outcome. Through the Omani Channel, Washington and Tehran reach a partial arrangement. Iran agrees to freeze enrichment at 60%, cap the stockpile where it is, allow some restoration of IAEA access. In exchange, the U.S. unfreezes some assets and eases sanctions on specific sectors. This does not roll back the stockpile, does not fully restore monitoring, does not touch Fordow's centrifuge capacity, but it pauses the escalation. For a year or two, Israel would likely be unhappy, but contained through American reassurances and continued covert pressure, oil stays relatively calm, markets stabilize. The underlying issue does not get solved, it just gets handed in a bigger form to whoever comes next. Scenario 2. Honestly, the one many analysts consider most likely. Nothing dramatic happens in the near term. Talks continue at the edges without producing a verifiable freeze. IAEA access keeps eroding. Covert operations continue. Cyber attacks on enrichment infrastructure. Targeted actions against program personnel. Iran responds through its proxy network. More pressure on shipping in the Red Sea. More friction around the American presence in Iraq. Cyber operations against financial and energy targets in the Gulf. This slow burn version could drag on for years, costing the global economy a steady drip of elevated energy prices and supply disruptions, while Iran's capability quietly continues to mature beneath the noise of daily headlines. The likely endpoint, what some call threshold status. A country everyone privately understands could build a weapon quickly, but that no government wants to formally acknowledge, reshaping the region's balance of power. For years, without a single dramatic event marking the change. Scenario 3, the one nobody in Washington wants to say out loud on the record. A coordinated strike targeting Fordow, Natanz, and Iran's conversion facility at Isfahan, aimed at degrading as much of the program's infrastructure as possible. In one move, even in the most optimistic version of this, using the only weapon system capable of reaching Fordow's depth. Most assessments suggest this would delay the program by roughly 18 months to 3 years. Not eliminates it, a program with this much institutional depth, built over 30 years, does not disappear because of an airstrike. Iran's likely response would be multi-pronged. Mining or threatening the Strait of Hormuz, intensified attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure through its proxies, the largest rocket and missile campaign Hezbollah has ever launched against northern Israel. Attacks on American positions across Iraq and Syria within weeks. This could escalate from proxy conflict toward direct confrontation. Oil could spike toward the upper end of those earlier estimates. Gasoline prices could surge dramatically. Global markets could experience a shock not seen since the early days of the pandemic, potentially tipping major economies toward recession. And at the end of all of that, by most expert estimates, Iran would still have a nuclear program, battered, delayed, but not gone, and arguably more determined than ever to finish what it started. So here's the honest takeaway. And I think this is the part worth sitting with for 30 years. The pattern of Western engagement with this issue has been the same. Partial deals, temporary freezes, declarations of progress, while the core program kept advancing underneath it all. Some analysts argue the window for a purely diplomatic outcome that fully eliminates this capability may have already closed years ago, and what is left now are choices between bad options and worse ones. The stockpile Iran has built is not something its leadership appears willing to simply trade away. Many see it as the ultimate guarantee of regime survival. In a region where other governments without that kind of leverage have been removed by outside military power, while nuclear armed states have not, every round of negotiation has followed the same shape: give up something secondary, protect what is core, let time do the rest. The uncomfortable question underneath all of this is whether there is any version of later that is actually better than now. Does the world have more leverage today than it will in a year? Or less? Is there still a diplomatic path that has not been tried? Or has that path already quietly closed? While everyone was busy calling the latest partial agreement a breakthrough, that is the debate I want to leave you with. Has the window already closed? Or is there still a path that diplomats have not found yet? Drop your take in the comments, because this is genuinely one of the defining foreign policy questions of this decade. And I want to know where you land on it.